Speaker, or should I call him shop steward, Martin finished?
No, I don't think he's finished. When you were doing your Stanley Baxter Parliama Glasgow there earlier, you were talking about a Stussy. I think it's moved to a Stramash, however.
Now we're getting very technical.
Now we're getting very ethnic, very ethnic. We'll need to get subtitles for this part of the programme. But it is getting more difficult. I mean, Michael was just commenting as we were watching Quentin's film there. I mean, it would have been unthinkable, up until a few weeks ago probably, that any lobby journalist would come on and just describe the Speaker as an idiot, for a start. It would also be almost unthinkable. I remember back, the first Speaker when I was an MP back in the 80s, Jack Weatherall, there was an argument which I think was put forward at the time by the then alliance, by ourselves, the SDP and the Liberals, about fairer speaking rights. And there was a threat of putting down a motion criticising him. And he went absolutely incandescent, and he said that if a motion went down the order paper criticising him, he would resign on principle. Now there's open canvassing going on around the Palace of Westminster. Will you sign the motion? And it looks as if it's going to go down next week. It's a very, very bad state of affairs.
Well, Chris Huhne
yes,
tonight has called for him to go.
Yeah.
Would you join that call?
I wouldn't at this point, because I think that we're in the middle of such a catastrophe, really, that I think if the House of Commons started, if you like, offering up the Speaker, partly that would be a terrible scalp to grant to the Fourth Estate, particularly the Daily Telegraph. But I don't actually think they make the situation any better. No. I think we've got to try and sort things out as they are.
Will he hang on till the general election, or can he be forced out before?
I don't think he can be forced out, partly because there are a lot of MPs, particularly Labour MPs, who think we can't give his scalp to the media. Yeah. And there will be Tories who will think that if we force him out before the election and we have a vote, it'll be a vote in a House where Labour still has the majority. So the danger is that if we were really silly, we might elect another Labour Speaker. I think that would be wrong. But we'll certainly elect, if we elect a Tory Speaker, it'll be one that's not acceptable to the Tory front bench.
But he is seriously damaged goods, isn't he?
He's seriously damaged. I think the best outcome really would be for him to indicate quite soon the date at which he's going to leave. The date at which he ought to leave ought to coincide with the moment when the House of Commons completes the reforms that are necessary. I think if a new Speaker came in now before the reforms have been completed or agreed, there'd be a real danger that that Speaker would also become entirely engulfed in this. By the way, I dissent from your idea. I think the Speaker should be elected by an outgoing House of Commons, a House of Commons that knows all the candidates very, very well. And I think it would be rather a good thing if there's going to be a Conservative government. I don't guarantee there will be one, but if there is going to be a Conservative government, it'd be quite good to have a Labour Speaker.
Sure, let me just say quickly, though, this scapegoating of the Speaker, whatever the merits or demerits of the Speaker, he's as good and as bad as the House of Commons itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
so he shouldn't be a scapegoat.
No politician is coming out well from this whole scandal. None. But David Cameron's probably doing better than most.
You know, I saw when he came out in the afternoon, and sackings and this and that. And I spoke to a wide range of Labour MPs, and we grudgingly had to admit that certainly for that news cycle, he had the better of us.
But it is nevertheless damaging to Mr Cameron's attempts to rebrand the Conservative Party. If you're trying to rebrand it as modern and 21st century and progressive, then to be reminded that there's a whole bunch of Tory grandees with moats and helipads and gardens so big they need 300 quid's worth of manure.
Of course. Of course. I mean, apparently, you know, he was spurred into action when he read about the moat. In a more broad sense as well, people are reminded of Tory sleaze, which, you know, still resonates, even though it's all the way back to 1997. So he was impelled to take very severe action. But I think the action that he took was indeed effective, and he did move incredibly quickly.
So those Tory grandees are not happy. Not happy at all. And many of them will not be giving any money back.
No, but they seem to be... He seems to have them under his thumb.
Yeah, they're sucking it up.
They are. They hate it, but they're not in a mood to... and Mr Clegg and the Lib Dems got off relatively lightly so far.
Relatively lightly. I think everybody in the Palace of Westminster is saying so far, actually, at the moment, because we don't know how long this is going to run and run and run for, obviously. But I think I would agree with what Dan was saying about Cameron in particular. I mean, if you start the day with that raft of stories, which do bring back all the sleaze issues from days gone by, and the rebranding you've tried, and here is a Conservative Party that looks as if it was pre-1832 Reform Act. These same people are still out there, living in the same kinds of places, doing the same sorts of things. You know, where's your modernisation agenda? By the afternoon, and I don't say this necessarily as a compliment, but as an acknowledgement, he turned it into a Blair moment, the way in which he'd managed to turn it round. Now, that may not necessarily augur well for the future if he becomes Prime Minister.
You were asking at one point where this story is going to go next.
Yes.
You know, one thing we have not been talking about is outside earnings. And I think the House has already resolved, hasn't it, that outside earnings are going to be declared in minute detail.
Yes.
Now, there'll be
who's paying them and how much?
Yeah, there'll be two consequences of that. One, of course, is that there'll be more outside earnings for Tories than there are for the other parties, on the whole, I would say. And the second thing is that every item of outside earnings will be denigrated and ridiculed.
Yes.
You know, there will be people making £500 an hour for consultancy, because that's what people make. I mean, you know, lawyers listening to this programme will be familiar with the figure of £500 an hour. This is the stuff that people do. Okay. And then you'll be into a situation where members of Parliament are shamed away from having any outside earnings, and then you're into a whole different ball game, because you're asking people to live on £63,000 a year.
And the Prime Minister always seems to be behind the curve on this, and that's making him less safe?
Yeah, I don't think the Prime Minister can be moved before the next election anyway, and I think it would be very unwise. But, you know, certainly at this point, Cameron, it may all be bogus, it may all be show, but Cameron has, you know, worked it quite well.
Interesting you're saying about outside earnings coming this year. William Hague told me for this weekend Straight Talk that he's giving up all his outside interests now.
Well, that's a big sacrifice on his part.
Right.